Hi, welcome to A Foreigner in the Philippines. I'm not sure whether people realize that what I was doing before we got involved in this mission of ours, I was actually writing, and I'd written 3 books, and I wanted to talk about those books, which you may or may not find interesting. But if I give you the titles, then you can find some of those stories narrated on this channel, and once you have the titles you'll be able to go and have a look. But the first one that I brought was The Bringer of Light, and this was the main story was about my son Luke and the sense of privilege that I felt in being a single parent to him when I came out to America. I came out to America when everything had gone right down the toilet. I really lost everything. I've done that a couple of times in my life where I've lost everything and had to start again, and a lot of people have been through this. Now the thing is that people usually think that they've gone through it and they're the only one, that it's something that has specially been lined up and leveled at them, and there's very little that's new. What's that saying? Nothing is new under the sun, or something very similar to that. And the fact is that problems, our problems, no matter what they are, it's all been done before. Somebody, I don't know, somebody in a tiny village out in the north of England or the south of England, some farmer will be out in Kentucky, or somebody somewhere in India, somebody somewhere in Pakistan, in Australia, in Canada, in America, will go through the same thing, the same part of a bitter disappointment in life, and they will go through that same thing. The Bringer of Light is of a time when I went through that, and how it changed me. But you know, I don't know whether this really was a quote from China or not, but people always quote this and say that if it doesn't kill you, then it will make you stronger. I'm not sure that the Chinese ever had that, just in the same way that Albert Einstein is quoted as saying certain things that I'm sure that he never did say. So it is one of those things. Well, The Bringer of Light is the book. Now, the next book was 7 Days. And 7 Days was, I came out to the Philippines, and everything was magically new to me, as if I was seeing, well, I was seeing it all from a different perspective, from a different point of life. I'd run away, in fact, from America. I'd run away from a place where my meager pensions would not allow me to live any decent kind of a life. Now, I'm always rather surprised at how people level this as a criticism of any expat that comes here, and they say, yeah, well, he ran away, didn't he? He ran away and he came here because he can't afford to live in the US on his pension. That's a criticism. That sounds to me like the sensible thing was done. If you have the money to be able to live in another place, that you can't live in the place that you're in, then get the hell out of there. Why would anybody be regarded as being brave when they could make a simple move and have a new start in life? So, never quite understood that. Now, what usually happens is the ones that are, I think, the expats who are beaten, the ones that have suffered some great losses and have not handled them very well, and they come over here and then they suddenly find that they are so much better off with the same money that they could hardly do anything with when they were home. And then they go from running away from a certain kind of life to trying to reproduce that certain kind of life that they ran away from in the place that they ran to. Instead of glorifying the human spirit and looking at this new culture, in the case of the Philippines, where people are actually happy. Now, that's the secret that I feel that we should be hound dogging that down. Why is it that Filipinos are able to smile, to laugh, to have fun in the most incredibly trying situations? Well, they can. I don't fully have the answer to it, but I've adopted many of the different ways of looking at things, and I'm much, much happier for it. So the 7 days is a different story for each day of a week in the Philippines. I hope you like that. Now, then there's another book, which is another collection of short stories. It's called Dying Man and the $4 Coffin. And Dying Man was someone who was dying, and it tells about his life, and apparently he was quite a naughty boy. So when you go in there and you find it's taken from a particular viewpoint, which may be dark humour for you, but dry humour, dark humour, I actually like that. And this one is an especially dark. When I say dark, there's never any real profanity in my writing. I just don't do the F word in normal life unless I really get challenged in a moment and lose my temper, or as the British would say, oh yeah, well he lost his rag, didn't he? Not quite sure what the rag is, but then so many of these phrases that come to mind don't actually make a terrific amount of sense. So yeah, if I've lost my rag, I might use an F word. I certainly don't enjoy writing about it, so I don't do that. So those 3 books are all easy reads. When I started to write short stories, I thought, wouldn't it be terrific to be able to write something which captures the person who's reading it in the first few paragraphs of the first page, and you've got them, and then they care about what happens to these characters that are there. And I read hundreds of books. I set myself a goal. I asked a lot of people, what's your favourite book? And then I'd go to the library, and I would read that book. I found a book that was a collection of short stories by very famous writers, classic writers, Scott Fitzgerald, Dostoevsky, John Steinbeck, Flannery O'Connor, just incredible writers, and they had all contributed a short story or two to this book, and there were, if I remember rightly, there were 86 stories, and I read every one of them. Russian writers, Italian, just every different kind of language that had been taken from that native language of the writer and put into English and done super well. And so I had a huge input of different styles, which I adopted in part, small or large, or my favourite writers, John Steinbeck, Joseph Heller. Joseph Heller wrote Catch-22. John Steinbeck wrote books which never fail to bring me to tears. He wrote about the great trek to California by what were called the Okies, and they were displaced farmers who were in the Dust Bowl of Oklahoma, where their farms went bust. I think that they had a situation where everything was going very well, and they were able to borrow money on their farm, and then it suddenly went terribly wrong. Little bit like it happened in Florida or in the US a little while ago. So those stories touched me a great deal. And if you ever get the chance, to pick up a small book called The Pastures of Heaven. And The Pastures of Heaven were incredible stories. And one of the ones that really touched me, and of course I'm meandering again, one of the ones that really touched me was the story of a young girl who, she was part of a broken family. She had two brothers, but let me see, what can I, Nancy, maybe her name was Nancy, and Nancy had, don't hold me to the Nancy thing, okay, but it'll do for now. Nancy had this father that she adored, and the father was a salesman, and he travelled the country. This is in America. He travelled the country, and every so often he came home, and when he came home he always had magical gifts for each of them. Not huge gifts, expensive, but he'd come back to the Philippine style of simple home, simple dirt floors, and he would bring with him, apart from the gifts, he would bring with him these stories. And he was a gifted storyteller, and the children adored him. And children from other farms would come as soon as they knew that Nancy's father was home. It was like a local event for the children, because they would come and they would sit at his feet and he would tell the most magical stories. Well, time would go by, and eventually they would hear an argument between the father and the mother, and the father would go into town, and when he came home he would be very drunk and out of control, and then the children would eventually go to sleep, and in the morning he would be gone. And he always came back, except one time, and then he didn't come back. But for her, she always believed that her father would come for her, and that he would take her away to these magical places that he always told her about. And she lived that for the rest of her life, up to the point where the writer, where Steinbeck takes you to a point where she has become a school teacher, and she goes to this place called the Pastures of Heaven, and she stays with the most prominent man who had a large house, and she goes there for an interview. And the interview is a magical scene where the man, I think his name is John, an older man, and this exchange between them, not about the questions about whether she had this experience or that, but he just liked her. And he said, well, I think that you have the job. You're the new school teacher, and you're going to need somewhere to live. Where would you live? And she said, I'd like to live here. And he does no more than say to his wife, Edna, this young lady would like to live here. What do you say about that? And he doesn't say yes or no. He just lets his wife say, well, she can stay in that top bedroom. And that's what she does. Anyway, time goes by, and she is such a popular woman, a young woman. She's beautiful. She is well loved, well liked, well respected, and everybody would for any kind of decision that was being made in the pastures, the teacher would be part of that discussion. And then she is attending one meeting of the family of the village council, if you like. And this man comes in and he said, "I'm sorry I'm late." He said, I've just got through picking up a new worker that I've got, and he's out in the car. Every so often he works, he does okay, but it's not that he's good at anything other than telling stories. He said, and the kids would murder me if I tried to fire him. But he goes along and he does okay, and he does okay, and he does okay, and he tells his stories, and everybody loves him. And then he'll disappear, and he'll go into town, and then he'll come back on a bender, and he'll be useless for a couple of days. But they won't let me fire him. And he's obviously describing Nancy's father. And she goes out, she is almost in tears because she feels that this is what he is describing, that it's her father. How could it be her father? But then she goes out and she approaches the pickup truck of the man, and she hears the drunken snoring and sniffling, and she doesn't look, but she runs away. And she runs away, and then when the meeting is over, she goes in to see John, and she says, I have to leave. And he says, well, let us get somebody else to make... He says, no, I have to leave. And I'm not quite sure whether she tells him why, but in some mysterious way I think he guesses, and he says, I'll run you down to the station. So the stories are incredibly touching, and I learned that if you can touch people's emotions in this way, they'll come back and do what I did, where even if I had read the stories over and over again, I would be able to read those stories to my children, and they would cry. So we'd all be in there, and I would tell the story of Nancy, the school teacher, and her father, and they would be sniffling. In fact, my son Luke, I used to say to him, you're not crying, are you, Luke? He said, no, it's just my nose hurts. That was when he was very young. So then after that it was, so Luke, is your nose hurting? Of course, young boys don't admit to things like that, do they? They're not touched at all. Of course they're not. So that's John Steinbeck, and how on earth I got there from my stories, I don't know. But I would love to think that I could touch people with the short stories that I write. And you can buy all of my books, all 3 of my books of short stories, with an average of maybe 6 to 10 short stories. And one of the nicest things that anybody ever said about my stories was that every one is a favorite until they read the next one. And I remember bringing one, I was working for someone, and I respected this man a great deal, Corey, his name was, in Fort Myers. And I asked Corey if he would look at some of stories. I hadn't gotten anything on Amazon at that time, and I gave him, I think, 5 or 6 short stories, and he was a mentor to me in some ways, and I'd asked him, would you be willing to mentor me in some way? I respect what you do and your sense of business and ethics. And he said, you know, I was helped by someone, and I've often thought that I should pay that back by helping someone else. So, yes, I would be privileged to help you. And so I gave him my short stories, and the next day, I got a note from him, and he said, I started reading your stories last night. He said, and you told me, you always told me that you wanted me to be totally honest with you. So, yes, Corey, I did. And he said, I was going to read one story, and he said, and I read one story, and I had to go on and read the next story. He said, and in the end, instead of reading one story, he said, I had to stay up late and read every single story. So, bravo. It's a very old-fashioned way to say something. Hey, bravo! 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 But it was a great compliment to me. So please look at my books, because they are for an outrageous price. You may have to pay, I don't know, $12 or $15 for all three. And I hope that you can't put them down, and I hope that you go back and read them again, and maybe if you've got children, you might read to them too. So this is a foreigner in the Philippines talking about my books. Thank you for being with me. Bye for now. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and buy the bloody books, would you? I went and swore. Oh dear.